Good morning, Sac City. We're now moving on to the NFC West breakdowns, fantasy outlook, starting with the Los Angeles Rams, the defending Super Bowl champions. Aaron, I know you just got a whole lot of talking done with this Rashad Penny talk, but I'm going with you first here to continue talking about running backs. And we mentioned Cam Akers, we mentioned Darrell Henderson, and you brought up Darrell Henderson's performance when he did return last season. There was some inconsistencies. How should people feel about drafting Cam Akers or maybe drafting Darrell Henderson, or how much value comes from this running back position in Los Angeles? Oh, that's a minus.
Minus.
I think it's tough. I think it's one of the tougher backfields to kind of navigate just because of the history of Sean McVay kind of going with the hot hand. Not saying that I don't think Cam Akers is the guy, because I do. We've seen Darrell Henderson. We've seen him be up and down and up and down, and he's had his moments, but I think Cam Akers is the more sustainable running back, and I think he will be in that offense. He's got power, he's got speed, he has the playmaking ability, and he can catch out of the backfield too. I do think they're going to use both of them, and I think it's a matter of just when and how many touches that he actually gets. I still think this Rams football team wants to rely heavily on the run, and I think that's going to be a benefit to Cam Akers. I think he's going to be their goal line guy, so I think he'll be productive. He's a year coming back from the Achilles. He should be better there. I still would weigh it out probably 60-40 Cam Akers. But he'll lose some touches to Darrell Henderson, and there'll be times where Darrell Henderson will break off for 20 yards, break off for 15, and next thing you know, Darrell Henderson's the one with 14 carries in that game just because of what Sean McVay likes to do. But over the course of the season, I think it'll weigh itself out. I think Cam Akers becomes the lead guy, and you can feel pretty comfortable with running with a guy like that as your RB2.
What do you have to say to the people that bring up what he did in the playoffs last season? Because if you look at his numbers through last postseason, it was slightly disappointing. 0 touchdowns, average 3.48 yards per attempt, only 17 attempts per. I mean, it really was inconsistent when Cam Akers returned last season in the playoffs. And obviously, returning from a serious injury, that might be a big factor. But how much thought are you putting into what his performance looked like in the playoffs last year?
None. I mean, we saw that it looked lackluster, but let's be honest, he didn't play one regular season game. And then you just throw into the playoffs, which defenses play tighter. It's harder to run. Finding running lanes is not easy. I put zero stock into the fact that he didn't play very well in the playoffs. A lot of teams had trouble running the football. To me, it's a clean slate. I look back to 2 years ago when he started to take over that lead job at the end of the season. He started to play better. You could see what they had in him. I think it'll be more of that. I don't think Cam Akers is going to ever be a guy under Sean McVay that will be the top 7, 8, 9 back that maybe we think he has the potential to be just because of their offensive system. But again, solid RB2, and I think you can feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, he's being right now drafted as the RB17. Him, James Conner, and Elijah Mitchell all going roughly around the same area. Cam Akers is RB17, James Conner, RB16, Elijah Mitchell, RB22, all around that same area. So it's going to be a kind of a toss-up when evaluating these three NFC West running backs. Dylan, at the wide receiver position, the Los Angeles Rams brought in Allen Robinson, who we have been known to talk about a lot on this show, coming off of a very, very disappointing might be generous to say, even for what Allen Robinson did last season in Chicago. Do you see a bounce back season for Allen Robinson, and can we trust that when drafting him in fantasy football this year?
I think you see a little bit of both. He's not going to be as bad as last year. I mean, 410 yards. Are you freaking bleeping me? Are you bleeping me there? I mean, you look at this guy. He's all over the place on the football field. He's a physical specimen who's a great 50-50 baller. Thank God he gets himself a quarterback, right? I mean, it's Matthew Stafford is going to be just a dream come true for him. I'm sure he's been thinking about having a quarterback for years, going from Bortles to Trubisky to freaking whoever the Bears throw in there. And then you got Fields for a year with a weird offensive scheme. And however you want to go about it, he's feeling pretty good right now. I think fantasy wise, I mean, this guy is just he's a solid wide receiver. And I know what's sort of strange here is his touchdown numbers. He only had one last year, 6 the year before, 7 the year before that, and then he had 4. And like he's not a big time touchdown guy. Those aren't insane touchdown numbers. He's not getting like 8, 9, 10 touchdowns a year. You think for a guy of his size of 50-50 ball, he could go up and score more touchdowns. That's not what he's been doing as of late. Maybe a good quarterback helps him out. A good scheme with Sean McVay helps him. I think he does bounce back. I don't think we're seeing those 1,200-yard seasons, the big time. He might be somewhere around the 790 to 840 range with maybe 5 touchdowns, about 60 catches.
I love Allen Robinson this year. I love him where he's being drafted. I
You love Allen Robinson every year.
I'm very hopeful.
Him in freaking Detroit.
Like you said, though, with Matthew Stafford now as his quarterback, and you brought up the fact that he's not necessarily the touchdown guy, and that could be what Cooper Kupp does, and who knows what Cooper. We talk a lot about Cooper Kupp this coming season in fantasy, and him still being a top 5 wide receiver. Some say the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy. But Allen Robinson, I think, is going to be a big part of this offense. Obviously, losing Robert Woods. Who knows if Odell Beckham Jr. comes back? You talked earlier when we were talking about the Bucs and the targets that they're losing. Allen Robinson is going to come in here and take a lot of these targets from Matthew Stafford, who is the best quarterback he has had in his entire career. I think this is going to be this is a bounce back year for Allen Robinson. Right now, he's going as the wide receiver 33, going right behind players like Elijah Moore, Adam Thielen, Tyler Lockett, Jerry Jeudy, who we talked about on maybe we'll talk about him in our AFC West show. I like everything about Allen Robinson this year. And I know you talk about me loving him,
you do.
But it's hard not
Nothing
to like
wrong with it.
It's hard not to like it this year, right?
His ADP his ADP is way too low, but I think Dylan hit it right on the head. To be honest, I think that's Dylan's best take today. He will have a bounce back year, but I too also do not think it's going to be some crazy back to 1,200 yards. And he's never been a big touchdown guy, 14 touchdowns or whatever his career high is. I think it'll be kind of a middle of the road. Borderline, could maybe crack into the wide receiver 2 on a good year. But probably closer to a wide receiver 3, but that's still better than what he's being drafted as. So you're probably getting good value on him either way.
Yeah, I see a low end wide receiver 2 performance season from him, and high with his upside being a high end wide receiver 2. I don't see him being a wide receiver 1, but I do see a ceiling of wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 2 this season.